beautiful, smooth, soft, delicate, strong, and precious. This amazing fabric has captivated human imagination for over 3,000 years. Throughout history, it has clothed the rich and powerful. But more than this, it has been a form of currency, a tool of diplomacy, a badge of rank, and a fabric of the divine. And silk, above all other treasures, has been the thread connecting East and West. It is an artifact that has truly shaped history.
At the end of the 12th century, Genghis Khan and his army of horsemen, the Mongol horde, swept down from their capital at Karakum across these steppes and conquered everything in their path. These mounted warriors established the most far-reaching empire in the history of the world. It covered all of Central Asia and stretched all the way from China to Poland.
Feared as ferocious, bloodthirsty barbarians, the Mongols were actually one of the most professional and effective cavalry armies the world has ever seen. Their skill on horseback has been passed down to their modern-day descendants. Each soldier was a self-contained and self-sufficient battle unit. Not just skilled horsemen, they were also deadly archers. They carried two bows, a heavy one for shooting targets at distance, and a light one for close combat. A lance with a sickle-shaped hook and an axe completed their personal arsenals. But their skill with weapons wasn't their only strength. Their armor was made of several layers of thick leather strips. And worn underneath their armor, one of the secrets of their invincibility: silk underwear.
Under their leather outer armor, the Mongolian warriors wore a silk undershirt, and it was worn for a purpose. Silk is such a strong material that if an arrow or a spear pierced their leather outer armor, it would pull the silk of their undershirt into the wound, preventing the barbs from catching in their skin, and also keeping the point away from the wound, and thus preventing infection. It also kept them warm. Thus, garbed with their silk underclothes, the Mongolian warriors rode into battle in comfort and safety. But the Mongols were nomads, and they didn't cultivate the silkworm or the mulberry bushes upon which they fed. So where did they get enough silk to clothe the thousands of mounted warriors of the Mongol horde?
The discovery of silk is said to have taken place in China almost 2,500 years ago by the wife of the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi. Legend has it that the lady Shilin made her discovery when a silk moth cocoon fell from a mulberry tree into her hot tea and began to unravel. The Empress has been revered ever since as the Lady of Silk, who taught the Chinese to cultivate mulberry trees and raise silkworms. Her discovery of the secret of silk would profoundly influence the history of China and of the world. This is the Great Wall at Scimitar, the northern boundary of ancient China. Here, an inscribed stone marks the boundary between the civilized world of the Middle Kingdom, China, and the land of the northern barbarians. Beyond the wall was, to the ancient Chinese, a land of legend, strange, exotic, and unknown. It was also dangerous, as this great defensive wall clearly shows. But the Great Wall was not China's only protection. Since the time of the earliest empire in China, the Han, the Chinese paid, or rather bribed, the nomads called the Xiongnu not to attack China with annual gifts of thousands of bolts of fine silk. These are some of the earliest silks ever found. They are from China and were used to line the coffin of a Xiongnu warrior. It is the same silk which over 1,000 years later the Mongols obtained from the Chinese as bribes, and so were able to make a shirt for every mounted warrior to protect them from wounds inflicted by Chinese arrows. Once firmly in command of a unified China, the Han began to send silk westward in a search for allies against the barbarians at their borders. And they opened overland trade with more distant peoples to the west. Thus the Silk Road, which transformed the history of China in the east and Rome in the west, was born. And so, 100 years before the birth of Christ, a great river of silk began to flow out from the northwest borders of China over land routes across Central Asia. The Silk Road wasn't just one route, but a number of branching paths which ran from oasis to oasis and up high and dangerous mountain paths. Paths described by one 5th century Chinese pilgrim like this.
There is snow in both winter and summer. Winds, rain, drifting sand with steep crags and precipices along the way. Going forward, there is no sure foothold.
From the distance of space, we can get a feeling of the true wilderness, the utter desolation of this terrain. This is the southwest corner of China's Xinjiang province. The Silk Road passes east to west through this image. The toughest part of the journey took them through the Taklamakan Desert, which means in dialect, if you go into this place, you won't come out alive. Much of China's rapid economic progress during the Han Dynasty came about because of traders who managed to make their way along this treacherous silk route. A journey to the west only made possible by the remarkable talents of this creature. The two-humped Bactrian camel is not a speed demon. It travels at only 2.5 miles an hour. But its endurance and its life-saving skills as a storm detector and water diviner are remarkable. At the sight of underground water, old camels will paw the ground, and before a human can sense an oncoming sandstorm, they roar, huddle together, and bury their noses in the sand, warning the traders and travelers and giving them a chance to take shelter. Only these intrepid beasts could make it across the enormous and desolate stretches of the Silk Road. But even with these camels, the journey was deadly. According to an early Chinese traveler, crossing the Taklamakan Desert was so dangerous that it was impossible to know the way except by following the path of decaying bones which showed the direction. Even if you survived the elements, you had to survive the bandits and brigands who descended like vultures out of the mountain passes to fall upon passing caravans. So what was it that made men risk their lives to cross this inhospitable wilderness? The incredible profits of the silk trade. If you want to understand why Chinese silk is so special and why it was so vastly profitable to Chinese traders, you have to get to know this rather unattractive creature, the blind, flightless Bombyx mori moth, which spins a cocoon for its larvae. Today, this species is cultivated for silk production, but the wild ancestor of this moth lived on the leaves of the white mulberry tree and was unique to China. Today, after the raw silk is degummed in boiling water, before weaving in the traditional manner, it is dyed with colorful modern synthetic aniline dyes. The silk that the moths spin is a continuous thread of incredible strength, measuring from 500 to 1,500 meters in length. Single filaments are too thin to use for weaving, and so, for production purposes, several filaments are combined, with a slight twist, into one strand. This process is known as silk reeling, or filature. These threads are then stretched and re-spooled before weaving. And finally, the thread, which is stronger than a similarly sized thread of steel, is then woven by hand to produce the fabric. The Chinese Bombyx mori silk moth has a triangular-shaped mouth. To illustrate why this is important, let's look for a moment at human hair through a microscope. Caucasian hair, under magnification, has a round cross-section, making it wavy. Negroid hair is oval-shaped, making it kinky or tightly curled. Asian hair has a rounded triangular shape, making it lie straight and flat and appear smooth and shiny. Like Asian hair, the silk filament extruded from the Chinese silk moth's uniquely shaped mouth has a similar triangular cross-section, making it lie straight and look smooth and flat when woven into silk fabric. That property, the triangular cross-sectional shape of silk thread, is what makes Chinese woven silk fabric so soft, so smooth, and so fine. Other parts of the world have similar moths, but the thread they produce is neither so fine nor capable of being continuously unreeled. Whereas the Chinese learned almost 4,000 years ago to carefully unwind the unbroken thread of these cocoons, other cultures typically waited until the cocoon was hatched and the continuous filament broken before using it to make silk. So, outside of China, silk thread was typically coarser and thicker, usually a multi-strand spun thread, which when woven produced a far less fine silk material. This very fine Chinese woven silk was often embroidered with fine silk thread. In China, so small were the stitches and so fine was this embroidery that it impaired the eyesight of the seamstresses who worked for the imperial court. To save their eyesight, this very fine and extravagantly labor-intensive forbidden stitch was outlawed by the communists when they came to power. The Chinese were manufacturing and exporting massive amounts of silk as early as the 2nd century before Christ. At that time, who in the world was wealthy enough to buy all of this exported silk? Well, the Romans, of course.
The sheer size and magnificence of these Roman ruins at Ephesus in modern Turkey gives some indication of the wealth of the Roman Empire. Much of this wealth was spent on the purchase of silk from China. More than 200 years before the birth of Christ, the Han dynasty of China was already exporting fine silk overland to the West. At this same time, the Roman Empire had reached its greatest extent, stretching from northern England in the west all the way to the borders of Turkey and Afghanistan in the east. Silk from China arrived here in Ephesus, the Asian capital of the Roman Empire and the original western terminus of the Silk Road. But its final destination was in Imperial Rome. The Roman aristocracy put enormous value on this fine, almost transparent material, which they called Chinese tissue. They thought it grew on trees and sometimes referred to it as tree wool. Ignorance about the mysterious origins of this material made it all the more glamorous and coveted, especially by Roman ladies for their dresses. The Roman author Pliny complained bitterly about the extravagance, the immodesty, not to mention the cost that was caused by the demand for this fine diaphanous silken material, especially among the women of the Roman upper classes. During the reign of the Emperor Augustus in 14 BC, the Roman Senate even found it necessary to ban Roman citizens from wearing silken clothing in public. The demand for Chinese silk grew steadily in Rome throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and in fact flourished throughout the imperial period. Julius Caesar's triumphant entry into Rome was welcomed with silk canopies. This street held stores selling luxury goods, among them silk. And even at the end, in 408, when the Visigoths besieged Rome, their leader Alaric demanded and got from the city a ransom of over 4,000 silk tunics and other rich booty.
Over the centuries, the Chinese traders didn't just bring back Roman gold. They also brought home the exotic treasures of the West, never before seen in China. Treasures that you can still discover in the bazaars of Istanbul, in Turkey, the crossroads between East and West.
Typically, the goods that traveled across these routes were luxury goods, low volume, high value, portable and light. King among them from the east, of course, was silk, but from the west came extremely rare and valuable items, such as, for instance, styrax, a resin that was used in perfumes and medicines, or opiment, a yellow mineral that was used as the dye in Chinese imperial robes, and frankincense and myrrh, incredibly valuable incenses from the Gulf area of the Middle East. One valuable item that traveled along the Silk Road was murex, the only fast, non-fading, natural color dye, imperial purple. This rare dye comes from a shellfish found only in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. Its use was restricted to the imperial courts. It was used to color the robes of the Roman Emperor, the Byzantine Emperor, the Turkish Sultans, and the Chinese Emperor. This rare dye was the single most durable status symbol in the history of the world.
Another valuable export item from the West was cobalt from Iran, which melts at a very high temperature and was therefore suitable for the blue underglaze decoration on ceramics. Until China found its own domestic sources of cobalt, it imported both the idea and the blue cobalt powder needed to produce blue and white ceramics. China also traded silk for blown glass, as the Chinese had not yet perfected this skill. Rare food items like dates and sweet clover were also sought after in China. They coveted rare gems like lapis lazuli, and Baltic and Russian amber was especially cherished. Trade in such scarce and valuable luxury items was not really true commercial trade. Rather, it was essentially an exchange of luxury goods between the ruling elites of different empires. Silk and other luxury goods were used as diplomatic tools and as ways to communicate between ruling elites. As popular as silk was for Chinese robes and Roman togas, silk had many other uses in addition to clothing.
Silk was not just an item that could be purchased in these bazaars. It was often the medium of exchange itself. Silk was more than just a luxury good. It was almost a substitute for cash, a common currency along the Silk Route, and in the cultural centers at either end, in China, Byzantium, Persia, and Western Europe. Silk became kind of a standard cash. A gold coin was worth 80 bolts of silk, a female slave 41, and a horse 100. Trade across Asia depended upon the maintenance of strong imperial power at both ends. But empires wax and wane. So it was for the Han, the founders of imperial China, and for the emperors in Rome. At either end of the Silk Road, these empires were faced with many challenges. The costly burden of defense, excessive taxes, rampant corruption, peasant uprisings and slave revolts, natural disasters, ruinous competition for imperial power, and invasions by barbarian tribes. This led to the breakdown of central authority.
With the death of the last Han emperor in the year 220 AD, China broke up into smaller, less stable kingdoms. And in the year 408, Rome fell to the barbarians. As these imperial states crumbled, international trade in both commodities and luxury goods, including the trade in silk, suffered. During this unstable period, the Silk Road was traversed only sporadically, as merchants could not travel safely nor keep the profits from their journeys. The few travelers who braved the trip had to have motivations beyond mere profit. They had to be on a mission inspired by faith. They began to travel not to the west as traders, but to the southwest, to India, as pilgrims.
Silk and other luxury trade goods were not the only things that moved along the Silk Road. Missionaries and religious pilgrims carried their beliefs with them, and one of the most powerful and persuasive of these beliefs was Buddhism. A robust trade grew up between China and India. Incredible volumes of fine Chinese silk were brought from China to India, where they were used to decorate temples and traded for Buddhist relics, which were reverently carried back to China and enshrined in pagodas. Among the Buddhist relics which were brought by Chinese pilgrims back from India was Indian silk. Early silk textiles manufactured in India were considered ritually pure and still are today. This giant statue of the Buddha, one of the largest in the world, located in Mongolia, is hung with over 500 meters of silk, most of it from India's holiest city, Varanasi.
Increasing hysteria over relics led to government crackdowns on the power of Buddhist monasteries in China. But in the end, the government realized that silk exchanged for relics was a small price to pay for the solace these relics gave to an exploited population. Buddhist religion gave them hope and made them more passive in the face of the trials and tribulations of their difficult lives. And so, rather than ban religion, China closely controlled and regulated it by imperial decree. In the centuries after the Han Dynasty, missionaries and merchants of numerous other faiths entered China and found many converts among the impoverished peasants and the insecure merchant class. There was, for instance, a large Nestorian Christian community in Chang'an, the capital of China at that time. In the 6th century, the most powerful ruler in the West, the successor of the Roman emperors, became aware of these Christians living in China and took advantage of the situation. He was Justinian, Emperor of Byzantium, the Eastern Christian Empire, constructor of the greatest church in Christendom, the Hagia Sophia. For the greater glory of Christ, not to mention the imperial treasury, Justinian was desperate to learn what the Romans could only guess at: the secret of silk manufacture. He arranged to have 2 Nestorian Christian missionaries from Persia smuggle silkworm eggs out of China. They hid the eggs in hollow walking sticks and brought them to his court in Constantinople, what is today Istanbul. After more than 1,000 years, China had finally lost her silk monopoly.
Once the Byzantines had broken the Chinese monopoly on silk production, they quickly established their own state monopoly, and imports from China declined.
Further east, in China, it took about 300 years for the politics of the region to stabilize. Eventually, a Turkic nomadic clan called the Tang took China's land and customs as its own, and in the 7th century, the Tang dynasty re-established the security and the safety of travel along the Silk Road. But by this time, the Byzantine Empire, the successor to the might of Rome, had joined China as a major silk production center. Commerce between China and Byzantium flourished, and both courts, the Byzantine and the Tang, luxuriated in silk. In both China and Byzantium, silk was used to make magnificent court robes that denoted the rank of the wearer. The clothing of the Tang court not only used different colors of silk for different ranks, but in the year 694, the Empress Wu Jia-Tian created a kind of vest for officials to wear, with different textile designs embroidered on it. At the Byzantine court, different ranks of officials wore robes with embroidered designs specific to each rank.
At the Byzantine court, the use of a different colored silk robe by each rank of court official was designed to eliminate any vestige of Roman Republican traditions from the imperial service. The use of embroidered silk rank badges to denote the ranks of officials at the Chinese imperial court persisted all the way until 1912. Officials in the military and civil ranks wore different symbols. For instance, the first rank military was represented front and back by the qilin, the Chinese mythical unicorn.
The symbols on military rank badges declined from the highest through, in descending order, lions and tigers and bears. The lowest ranks were an ox and a rhinoceros.
The 9 civil ranks of the Mandarin were denoted by birds. The first rank was the crane. The ranks descended from there through peacocks, ducks, egrets. The 8th rank, for instance, was the quail. This practice of using embroidered silk robes and rank badges was an attempt to reestablish and legitimize a state-sanctioned bureaucratic hierarchy, and to eliminate any indication of individualism or independence that was not approved or controlled by the
But soon, a new force in the world was threatening the safety of the empires that traded along the Silk Road, a force springing from fervent belief in a new prophet. Islam had begun its explosive expansion, galloping out of southern Arabia to inflict conversion by the sword on the peoples of southern Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. By the late 15th century, the entire Taklamakan region had been thoroughly conquered and dominated by Islam. The Prophet Muhammad had decreed to avoid the worship of icons, that no image of a human should be made, and so statues and paintings of the Buddha were systematically destroyed by believers.
In the West, proud Byzantium fell to the Muslim Ottoman Turks, and Justinian's great church was converted into a mosque.
Minaret towers from which to call the faithful to prayer were built to dominate the dome of what had been Christianity's greatest church. But just as in Buddhism, silk became a cloth sacred to the Muslims. The sacred Kaaba, the most important shrine in Mecca, is draped in black silk with the names of reigning caliphs woven into it to proclaim their piety, advertise their protection of the holy places, and proclaim their right to rule as successors to the Prophet.
Here in the city of Bursa, in Anatolia, the silk industry flourished because of the local mulberry trees on which the silk moths fed. The Ottoman sultans inherited and continued the Byzantine silk monopoly, and they built this marketplace and trading post at the western end of the Silk Road called the Kozahan, the Silk Cocoon Market. They built this marketplace to facilitate and control the trade in silk cocoons, and as an inn for traveling merchants.
And the Byzantine tradition of silk court robes was inherited by the Muslim Ottoman court. again because of the ban in Islam on human and animal imagery, floral and geometric patterns decorate these robes, rather than the eagle and duck patterns of the Byzantine court robes. Many of these patterns were influenced by Chinese styles. So skilled were the Ottoman weavers that European courts regularly ordered garments from Bursa. So important were these silk robes to the Ottoman court that when greeting the Sultan, visitors did not kiss his hand or his ring, as in the European tradition, but the hem of his robe.
The Tang, Ming, and Qing emperors wore elaborately embroidered silk robes, like this one, colored with royal yellow opalment dye imported from the West. Their empresses wore equally elaborate robes, covered with embroidered designs of Taoist symbols of immortality, delicately sewn with the forbidden stitch.
Although in the face of Islamic expansion, the silk trade again went into decline, silk making in China prospered as the new Sung dynasty court concentrated on internal matters. To buy themselves time and some security from attack, the Sung dynasty Chinese resorted to the trick used by the Han 1,000 years before. They used their silk to buy protection from the marauding tribes on their borders. This worked for 300 years, until the arrival of Genghis Khan. The Great Khan united all peoples and tribes living in felt tents into an army that proceeded to conquer half the world. As we saw, clad in their silk undershirts, the Mongols swept everything before them. With a force of only 20,000 cavalry, they conquered 80,000 Russian troops, swept through Poland into Germany, Hungary, and the Balkans. They crushed China, ruling it from their new capital at Beijing, invaded Burma, Vietnam, and Cambodia, conquered Korea, and invaded Japan. Eventually, they controlled almost the entire Asian landmass. Once again, now under the protection of the Mongol Empire, silk began to flow westward out of China. Silk, manufactured in China under the Yuan dynasty of the Mongols, was woven not only for high-ranking officials of the Mongol court, but also to order for the Vatican in Rome and for export to Muslim markets in Spain and for mosques in Syria, Egypt, and Arabia. But the Mongol Empire did not survive beyond 3 generations. They were far better at conquest than at administration. By the time Genghis Khan's grandchildren came to power, the Mongol Empire had already begun to collapse in tribal squabbles, intrigues, and squandering of their inheritance by the new Khans. In China, the Mongols were driven out and succeeded by the peasant leader, Hongwu, who founded the Ming dynasty. With the rise of the Ming, the overland Silk Road once more went into decline. At the western end, it was controlled by Italian and Arabic middlemen who charged extortionate marked-up prices for luxury goods and dominated the trickle that did manage to find its way across Asia. This encouraged explorers to set sail around the world looking for new ways to secure valuable silk and spices from the East. The discovery of alternative sea routes to the Silk Road broke the monopolies on the overland silk trade. No longer would danger, difficulty, and royal monopolies limit the availability of silk. Silk, shipped by sea, became more easily and readily available. Now the only restriction would be imposed by price. During the early Ming dynasty, the silk trade flourished. But quickly, the import of luxury goods so severely taxed China's limited supply of silver that it inhibited this trade. Rigidly conservative court officials decreed that such luxuries were too expensive and the money was better spent on reinforcing the Great Wall. By the middle years of the Ming Dynasty, trade with foreigners began to be looked down upon. In 1450, the borders of China were effectively closed to the outside world, ending the centuries-old influx of foreign ideas, goods, and culture. Xenophobia and anti-commercialism triumphed, and the Silk Road fell into disuse. The end of the Silk Road, however, was by no means the end of the story of silk. While silk is not an inherently rare material, the incredible versatility of this fabric ensures that it continues to be one of the most useful materials ever made. Its strength-to-weight ratio alone makes it extraordinarily valuable. Silk is like gold, another unique material sometimes used as money and often worn to display status and wealth. Like gold, silk has unique properties and numerous practical uses. Silk is highly resistant to rot and oxidation. Since it is not perishable, it is perfect as sewing thread for seams and embroidery. Since silk is a natural fiber, it breathes and efficiently conducts heat away from the body. Its isothermal properties make it cool in summer and warm in winter. Silk wadding is still the lightest, warmest, and least bulky material for quilted insulation, superior even to goose down. Silk is incredibly strong and light, and thus the perfect material for such uses as parachutes, where it can cover the greatest area for the lowest weight and bulk. During the wars of the 20th century, silk was so strategically valuable that scientists spent years trying to synthesize it for use in military parachutes when the supply was insufficient or cut off. Once they succeeded, by creating nylon as a substitute, its major peacetime use became women's stockings. The drive to develop a synthetic chemical substitute for silk led to the invention of plastic, with everything that implies for life in the second half of the 20th century and beyond. Even silk's smooth surface had an important and unexpected use value. More than just a dashing fashion statement, the white silk scarves worn by the early pilots served an important practical purpose. Since the pilots had to constantly swivel their heads to scan the sky for enemy aircraft, to prevent their necks from being chafed raw against leather or wool, they wore a smooth silk scarf. Because of silk's incredible absorbency, it holds dye well, both natural and synthetic. Modern Thai silks have become world famous for their brilliant and luminous colors. Over the last 50 years, with the support of Thailand's beautiful Queen Sirikit, Thai silk has become world famous and successfully rekindled the fashion world's fascination with silk. Thai silk is still big business today, and not just for fashion. Here at the Raja Mangala Institute of Technology in Bangkok, researchers are again discovering what the Mongols knew: the incredible toughness of silk. In 1998, the police and military of Thailand found that it was far too expensive to import Kevlar bulletproof vests for every officer and soldier. Sujita Kojimate and his colleagues at the Textile Engineering Department of the Institute considered this problem and decided there might be a locally available solution. After visiting a silk weaving community in northern Thailand, Sujita returned to Bangkok and took sheets of silk fabric, waterproofed them, and arranged them in layers at different angles to each other to provide strength in all directions. This bundle of fabric, made with more than 35 layers of silk, was fashioned into a vest and put to the ultimate test: gunfire. The silk bulletproof vest blocked all bullets from 11mm rounds to .38 specials. In fact, they met the Type 1 standard for body armor set by the U.S. government's National Institute of Justice at 1/2 the cost of imported synthetic Kevlar vests.
Genghis Khan's warriors, dressed in their silk undershirts, would have nodded and smiled and not been at all surprised. Today, the Thai police wear not Kevlar, but an alternative kind of body armor, one manufactured of locally produced Thai silk and designed to stop bullets, just as the Mongols' silk undershirts stopped arrows.
From the army of the Mongol hordes to the police of modern-day Thailand, people have been fascinated by the amazing properties of silk. From the Roman, Chinese, and Byzantine emperors to the courtiers who served them, their elegant wives and beautiful courtesans, people have been captivated by silk's beauty. And throughout history, this amazing artifact has shaped the lives of the people who traded it, used it, paid their taxes, and honored their gods with it, weaving its way into the very civilizations that prized it above all other fabrics.